Hello and welcome to Kitchen Table Talks. My name is Toni Austin Allen and I am here with Dr. Roy Austin, author of Definitions for Living, a book dedicated to helping you live more effectively and happily, both personally and in your relationships with others. A number of years ago, Dr. Austin compiled numerous articles which he had written to assist his clients into what is now his book, Definitions for Living, making sense of words and ideas that define our lives. Recently, he and I began sitting at our kitchen table and talking about his book, and we became excited about the possibility of sharing our conversations with others who might benefit from them. The podcast you are about to listen to are the product of the recordings we began making of our conversations. We have discussed the book chapter by chapter and have produced this series of podcasts to accompany the printed version of the book, which is now available as an ebook on various publishing websites. Although we believe you will benefit greatly from the podcasts themselves, you will get the most out of them by purchasing the book, reading each chapter prior to listening to the podcast, and having it available to follow along with our conversations. The ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We hope you enjoy our talks at our kitchen table as much as we have, and that your life will be greatly enriched by having shared our conversations with us. So we're coming back to the second chapter on effective communication skills. And I found myself humored yesterday because I was reading this through, I think for the second time in the last couple of months, and you said, if you have read this chapter, you already know
right.
more than 90% of the people out there on communication.
That is true, yeah.
And how is that possible? And why don't we know more about communication? This is crazy.
Because we're not taught.
This is true.
Basically, this is one of the big drawbacks of our culture, is that we do not teach our children how to do life well, generally, nor do we teach them specifically how to communicate really well. So it's a lack of education passed down from generation to generation.
It's very sad because we see this at the level of the home front, at the level of teacher to student of any age, boss to employee, to politics, to world, to global issues. It's an epidemic that I've never experienced before.
At every level of our society. And as good as technology is in so many areas of life, it also has a serious limitation of not allowing us or forcing us to learn how to communicate personally well with others. We use texting and emailing and other forms of technology to do our communicating for us, and it is a very poor substitute for the kinds of skills we're going to be talking about here over the next few minutes.
And I hate to tell you this, but email is almost obsolete at this point.
Yes, it is.
We're now getting to Snapchats and TikToks, which are bites of information.
Yes. So that is part of the problem, a big part of the problem now, and our culture will suffer from it, I'm totally convinced, for generations to come.
Mm-hmm. Well, shall we dig in?
We shall.
Okay, I'd like to go to the very first part of this chapter. It says, clarify your message to yourself first. The purpose, and this is huge, the purpose of communication is to send a message to produce a desired outcome. And down here, this word is really tricky for all of us. Before you say or do anything, take the time to ask yourself a few important questions. Before. So I'm supposed to think about this stuff before?
What a concept, right?
All right, I'm going to hand it over to you at this point.
Okay. Well, a good way to introduce this chapter, Tony, is for us to take a look at it from two separate but equal and clearly related issues. And so I've approached the chapter from two perspectives. One is in the chapter title itself, which includes the word skills, effective communication skills. And certainly I do emphasize skills in 8 separate categories that we'll get to as we go along. But it is extremely important for us to keep in mind as we approach this chapter that the second and equally important issue is that of the message itself. And that's why number one is number one. Because in my practice over the years, so many people would come to me and say, well, we have heard that, or I have heard, if it's not a couple, that the most important problem in a relationship is a lack of good communication. So we need to learn how to communicate better. And that is almost always true. That's clearly a fact. But they need to, I had to also tell them that not only is it important to learn the skills of communication, but also emphasize the message that you're sending in communication. And I used the analogy of a hammer. A hammer is simply a tool. You can use a hammer to build a shelter for yourself and your loved ones to protect you from the elements, or you can use the hammer to tear down something and to destroy a shelter or even to hurt someone with. And you can use a hammer as a weapon. So a hammer is simply an object to be used for good or for bad. And so it's not just the tools of communication that are important. You know, they say, well, the most important thing is good communication skills. It is not. Communication skills are just a set of tools which we use to send a message. So it's very important for us to think about not just how to communicate well, but what we're going to communicate in the first place. And that's the significance of this first part of the chapter, to clarify our message to ourselves first. What am I trying to communicate message-wise? Good skills are great, but you can communicate hatred and resentment and disdain and contempt very, very well and destroy a relationship. So it's not just knowing how to do it. Am I going to use these tools to build up a relationship, or I'm going to use them to tear down a relationship?
I have a question for you. Now, when you say what you're asking yourself, what is the message I want to communicate? Plan out your words and actions. If necessary, write them out and rehearse them. You're asking all these questions before you communicate. Now, are you talking about all communication, or just when you're wanting something serious, or what? Where are you talking about this?
Here again, this is on a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
The more important the issue is, and particularly the relationship is to you, the more important it is to plan out your communication well. The less important the message is, the less you have to plan it out. So it's not this kind of a thing that you have to, every thing that you plan to communicate, like, would you please pass the pepper for me at a table? You don't have to plan that out, just sit there and think about it. It's just instantaneous. But if you are talking about some behavior that needs to be considered about how are we going to pay the bills here, or what kind of a sexual relationship we're going to have, then you'd better plan out both your words and your actions more carefully ahead of time, because there's more at stake. So the more investment you have in the outcomes that you're after, the more important it is to spend time ahead of time to plan them and to think about these questions and answer them yourself first before you open your mouth.
But I will say you have a point. You said you don't have to think so much about passing the pepper, but if somebody just says, pass that pepper, or hand me that, or I'm taking that, I will probably be slightly offended, because in my upbringing, you ask somebody, you say, would you please do this for me? And so even at that benign level, there is an element of, let me think about how I say this to this person before I just take it from them or tell them that's what I want.
That's exactly right. It's a good point. Even in the most mundane of interactions we have, of course, the overall quality of the relationship, the trust level between the two people, and the general satisfaction that people have or don't have with the relationship, how they view themselves as either friends or enemies, and how the other person views them as a friend or an enemy, that has a lot to do with how you ask for what you want, or what do you say to someone, or how you look at them. Has a significant factor in how you even ask for someone to pass you the salt.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go on down. So you have to really think about, what is the message I want to communicate, and then what am I wanting to happen as a result of my message? So when you're communicating, we're always thinking about outcomes like that?
No, we're not. That's the problem.
I walked into that one.
This is, and that very fact is that we more often than not do not consider the outcomes that we're after, because communication at its basic bedrock principle is about results. It's results oriented. It's about what am I wanting to have happen? What are the consequences that I want from opening my mouth, or having a certain look, or doing a certain thing, like getting up and walking out of a room? What am I wanting to accomplish by sending that message that I'm leaving the room? So it's verbal and nonverbal communication that has to be considered, which we'll consider in the next chapter on nonverbal communication. But we too often do not think ahead about what am I wanting to happen, because that's what communication is all about, is getting a desired outcome.
Which is fascinating, because in this world of high technology and separateness, so many people today have a never-ending monologue in their conversation. They're not thinking about outcomes. They're not thinking about the message, but there must be something unconsciously going on.
Yes, there always is, at least unconsciously. They're trying to feel powerful with the example that you're using, or they need to be in control, or they need to convince somebody of something, or they need to appear smart and wise, often smarter and wiser than everybody else in the room. They're trying to feel good about themselves, or they're just needing to vent frustration and anger and hurt or hope or desire without really knowing what they're trying to communicate. They're just spewing out words without planning ahead and being not only self-aware, but also aware of others who are their audiences and the other person's needs and desires as well. And those two senses of awareness is, by the way, self-awareness and awareness of others are the two primary signs of emotional intelligence. And very few people are not emotionally intelligent. They do not have a sense of self-awareness or awareness of others. When they're talking, they're just spewing. But there's always someone or some combination of underlying intentions there, some desires that they're trying to satisfy or some need that they're trying to satisfy, whether they are consciously aware of it or not.
It ties so well in with my interest in teaching of meditation, because the first thing we learn to do is to watch our thoughts. Just watching and noticing what our thoughts do, and that in itself, even in the preliminary stages of meditation and contemplation, will help us to realize what our thoughts are doing inside of our mind. Have they taken over? Are we in the trance of thought? Are we making up stories? Or can we sit and just be with ourselves and or another person? And so it's really tying in with that very nicely.
There's a lot of interconnection and interaction between meditation and good communication and relationship skills. They're all intimately related and interdependent on each other.
Interesting. Let's go to C. It says, am I wanting to help or hurt this person? I tell you what, I bet you that is usually a post-thought. Oh my gosh, I hurt them by saying that. I didn't mean to do that. Oh, I'm sorry, you know. Or maybe sometimes we do intentionally mean to hurt somebody, but we don't realize that's our thought pattern.
Or we do not want to have to admit it.
Yes.
And that's very important. But you're exactly right. Sometimes we're not really consciously aware of our intentions there because we're not taught to think ahead before we communicate. So there are two forms of communication, or two contexts in which people communicate, and I've already mentioned it a little bit earlier in passing, and that is there's a whole genre of skills and techniques that we use to communicate as friends, and then there's a completely different set of skills and attitudes and intentions that we use knowingly or unknowingly to communicate as enemies. And a lot of people do not have clear boundaries inside their heads about what their intentions are. And sometimes it's difficult for all of us to admit that sometimes I'm not going to act as your friend in this interaction with you. I'm really going to attempt to be harmful to you in some way, or to make you feel bad about yourself, or to shame you, or to manipulate you or coerce you into actions, which we talked about in the first chapter conversation, that any form of coercion and manipulation fits within the category of an enemy, of a slave owner, and a coercer of people to do something against their will. And so our communication can fluctuate between friendship attitudes and behaviors and enemyship attitudes and behaviors. And we can slip from one to the other quite easily, and it's very confusing to our listeners. It's sort of like this, the old standard training that someone in the military gets when they're being placed on guard duty in the middle of the night, designated with the responsibility of protecting their fellow soldiers, and they're taught to say, in the genre of the common language, when they hear something snap out in the darkness, for them to say, "Halt! Who goes there? Friend or enemy?" And of course, that's a classic cliche type thing, but that's really how all of us look at any form of communication that someone is using with us. The first question we have in the back of our head is this person interacting with me as a friend or an enemy? And so it's very, very important that we face this issue with ourselves before we open our mouth or do anything. Am I communicating the message of friendship or enemyship here?
And we also don't know, with so many of the people we are in contact with, we don't know their past. We don't know their experiences with communication in the past, how much they've been hurt, or their level of trust and distrust. And then one more thing I wanted to say is that listening to our bodies, I know listening to my body has been a learning process for me in the last few years. And when I feel this clenching, and it could be listening to somebody that sounds well-meaning. We might be having a lovely discussion. I might have made myself vulnerable and said, I'm really struggling with this. And then I hear them say, "I don't mean to tell you what to do. And if you don't like it, you can put it aside. But that first thing, I don't mean to tell you what to do." And I go, "Ooh, oh my gosh, I'm going to tell you what to do."
Right.
And I clench, and there's something I know isn't right. And I'll be very honest with you, I'm guilty of doing the same thing. And I have to really watch my message. Because most of us really don't want to be told what to do unless we ask.
That's right. Which I'll go into in depth in a further chapter into the book on a matter of opinion. Those will be connected to all of this as well, is how to express opinions or give advice. So we'll talk about that later, but you're exactly right. Even how we present ourselves to someone can be easily interpreted or misinterpreted as, "You're not my friend here."
Yeah.
I think you might be my enemy. And people who have been mistreated and abused earlier in life, either as adults or as children, are particularly sensitive to any hint of coercion or abuse or mistreatment. And we have to take that into account when we may really believe we're presenting ourselves as a friend, but the other person may not be seeing us as a friend. We cannot assume that. So we have to be very careful to ask ourselves this question: do I want to help or hurt this person? But we've got to sometimes, number one, be honest with ourselves Yeah, I'm really not feeling very good toward this person, and I like to cause them a little discomfort or pain or suffering for some reason or another, and I'm just not honest enough to admit it. And then we live, like you said earlier, then we live to regret it later. And sometimes we can be perfectly innocent in what we're saying or doing, but like you said, the other person, because of their history, may interpret us as an enemy or a suspected enemy, and we don't even know that that's what's going on inside their head.
Well, I like what you say on the second page of this chapter, on the third, right before D, it says, by first clarifying to ourselves that our intention is to help, we can often approach others with a more relaxed and open demeanor that they can sense even as we talk to them. So that self-awareness ahead of time.
Yes.
What is my intention? And if I haven't thought about that, we're usually still in our head and we don't know the tone of voice we're using. It might come out as, well, I don't mean to tell you what to do, but, as opposed to, would you like some help with this? Or opening the door, just allowing that other person to be part of it.
I think your point is so well made, Tony, is that when we are consciously and deliberately making sure that we are aware of what we're trying to accomplish here, to be a friend or an enemy, when we hold ourselves accountable to our intentions, then our behaviors, our facial expressions, our tone of voice, our visual contact, our words tend to follow those intentions. So we need to make our intentions conscious to ourselves so that our behaviors can more easily be matched with those intentions rather than it being an afterthought. Oops, I really messed up there. I didn't say that the way I needed to have said it. But by then the damage can already be done.
Absolutely. Let's go on to D. When it says, do I want to create closeness or distance by what I say or do? And I'll tell you, this is a big one for me. I have not, in my past, been self-aware enough to know what I want, closeness or distance. And again, I'm in a learning curve with this. And I think this is very important for all of us because we don't pay much attention to our own needs to know if am I needing a little separation here? Am I just needing to take care of myself? What am I needing here? Or am I needing closeness with you? Is that what is missing? And I don't think many of us pay attention to this.
Most of us don't. And we have an added complication there, Tony, in that particularly if we're born and reared in a dysfunctional environment, a family or social or cultural environment, which includes nearly all of us to some extent. Here again, it's on a continuum. We are conditioned not to trust our bodies and our physiological feelings. We're taught not to trust our emotions. We're taught not to trust our thoughts and our needs. And we're often sent the message that our needs are not important. The needs of others are more important for us to satisfy. And so we're taught to be numb about what we need instead of trusting our bodies and our minds and our emotions to tell us what we need at any given moment. And then there are these rules about closeness and distance that are impactful as well on this particular paragraph, because the rules often say that either we are supposed to be, we should be, ought to be close to people all the time, or the opposite is true, that we're taught to keep our distance from people all of the time. And we don't know about the in between aspects of life, that distance and closeness are both very, very important and very necessary and very appropriate. So in order to attend to this particular set of paragraphs, we have to be willing to break the rules that society teaches us.
And in this last paragraph on this page, you say exactly what we need. And this is, I mean, I've been through I've been through life. I'm 60, and I'm just now learning how to do this. It's new. Once again, be sure to clarify to yourself first whether you need to be close to or apart from your partner. Then communicate your message in a way that meets your need but does not damage the relationship. Because sometimes I'll go helping, doing things, being close, and all of a sudden then I'm going crazy. I've got to get out of here. It's driving me crazy.
Right.
What am I doing? And then I'm running down the road or in my car cursing a blue streak. They just don't understand me, It's crazy what we do. We don't listen to ourselves.
That's true.
And be kind to not only ourselves, but to those around us.
And that's the key, is self-compassion and self-kindness and self-nurturing. Here again, you have to break the rules to do that, because we're not taught to love ourselves. We are taught to ignore our own needs and focus on satisfying the needs, basically put in parentheses here, the desires of other people. Put other people first is the old cliche. And so we're taught to ignore our needs, and therefore we don't give ourselves permission to be close to someone, or give ourselves permission to have some separateness and some solitude and difference, distance between ourselves and other people, because it's against the rules.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And to be able to ask that other person, friend, partner, spouse, child, to say, I'm really missing you. I would like a little time with you. We don't usually do that, but how appropriate is it, and how loving is that?
It is. And here again, the rules say, well, you shouldn't impose on other people. You shouldn't ask for anything. You should be independent and self-sufficient and not need anything from anybody. Don't inconvenience anybody. Don't ask them to do anything for you because it might interfere with what they're doing, rule after rule after rule, which keeps us from asking for what we need.
Mm-hmm. Now, going on to E, I'd like you to talk about this idea of being motivated by beliefs. It says, have I gotten the results I wanted when I have communicated like this in the past? And then you say, humans tend to be motivated more by beliefs than by reality.
And that is so true. I have a great story that might illustrate this. Many years ago, I was working with a couple. She had come to me first, and then really threatened her husband almost with divorce if he didn't join her, because they were having so many troubles, and he was being so insensitive to her, and sometimes even verbally abusive to her, telling her, criticizing her all the time for what she did or did not do to please him. And it became really intolerable to her, and so she demanded that you either come to see this counselor with me, or I'm going to leave you. So he showed up reluctantly, and so during the session, she was voicing all these complaints about how manipulative and coercive and shaming he was to her when she was doing anything that was against him or didn't please him enough. And so he was trying all kinds of coercive, manipulative techniques to try to get her to please him. And I asked him a question. I'll call him Sam. I said, Sam, when you treat Mary like this, as she has just described, what are you hoping to happen? Here again is what is the desired outcome question. What results are you after? And he said, well, I just have to get on to her like that because she didn't cook my eggs the way I needed them to be cooked, or she didn't have sex with me often enough last week. And I said, excuse me, Sam, let me ask you again. Sam, what are you hoping will happen by treating her this way? And he said, well, I do that because and then he went off on another tangent of saying everything that she was doing wrong that made him act the way he was acting. He was putting it off onto her. She's just basically not pleasing me. And I said, Sam, excuse me just a minute. Let me ask you again, and listen very carefully this time. Sam, what are you hoping will happen by treating her this way? And he sat very quietly for a moment, and he said, And then all of a sudden, he was a big hulking man, big, burly, assembly line type guy. And he would just sit there and his big shoulders started to shake. And he all of a sudden started sobbing quietly. And then he just started crying openly and sobbing. And he said, I just want her to love me.
Oh, poor thing.
He just broke down crying. Big grown man, probably hadn't cried in 40 years. And Mary and I just sat there and silently, and he just cried his heart out. And then he looked at me and he said, well, I guess that don't work too good, does it? So he had the belief that he could badger her into doing for him what he would interpret as love. So he was trying to manipulate her into doing things that he thought would prove, quote, quote, prove her love for him, and never really thinking about the results he was getting by driving her further and further away from him and wanting to be with him less and less because of his abuse of her. So he, in his mind, the little child part of his mind was hoping to get her love by making her his slave. And so that's what illustrates this particular issue, that beliefs are stronger than reality. He was practicing this old idea of insanity, this cliche of doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
Wow. That's a powerful, powerful story.
And it was a tipping point in their relationship.
I'd like to take a little intermission at this point and It was such a powerful story. I'd like the listeners just to have a little time to be with that and to think about the things we've already talked about. And then let's continue this chapter on the next section.
That will work well.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Again, Dr. Austin's ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribd, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We look forward to having you join us for our next podcast.